Well, that was wonderful. They told me it was called river blindness. River blindness. They said that as we were on the verge of crossing over this stream in sub-Saharan Africa. They said that there is a microscopic snail that can get underneath your toenails, and if it gets into your bloodstream, then it's a possibility that you could go blind from this virus that it would pass on to you. I took the boat that day instead of wading through. When I was in Port-au-Prince, I saw people holding small plastic see-through baggies on street corners, and they were selling drinking water to passersby for a few cents each because the tap water was not safe to drink in anyone's home. When I have heard of folks going to Mexico, I know that there's always an advisory of don't drink the tap water there, it might wreck your vacation. And so all of these thoughts were going through my mind as we descended into the lower level, the ancient basement of a Greek Orthodox church in Nablus, Palestine, and we were told there that we could drink from the water that would be poured into our thermoses and our cups that day. I decided to take a pass on that, just with all these thoughts going through my head. But it was a fantastic experience. You see, the setting of that church was on top of what in the Bible we hear about being Jacob's well. And unlike some sites in the Holy Land where you go and you visit and you say, they tell you that this is where such and such happened, with a well, I don't know, something about an ancient well seems to seem more plausible about they got the location right. It's not far from the archaeological site of ancient Shechem, which in today's Bible story is probably translated Sychar or Sychar, probably the same spot. And so here on this picture, you can see the walls of ancient Shechem and the mountain, Mount Gerizim, behind. And same there, that's at the entrance to this church. And then we went down and we were able to meet as a group, and there were about 25 of us from our pilgrimage that went back in 2022, and we were told that we could drink from Jacob's well. We got down there, and a number of our group members decided that they were going to do that. The bucket went way down in there. We let Jacob, we figured Jacob Dauphin in our group was an appropriate person to plumb the depths of Jacob's well. And so he drew the water, and members of our group took turns drinking it. Again, I opted out of that. As I thought about this story, and I was reading this story of Jesus and his interaction with this Samaritan woman, I think part of what needs to be said is a little bit of background on this to make sure that we understand sort of fully what's going on. You see, what really is important to understand is that this story couldn't have been the way that it was if there wasn't the history that had been 800 years in the making prior to Jesus' time at Jacob's well. See, it was in the 8th century BCE that the ancient Assyrian Empire laid siege on the northern kingdom of the Jews called Israel. And as they came into that area and they wreaked havoc in the land, they did the thing that so many ancient armies did, and we've talked about this several times before, that they would take some of the people from that local population and they would take them and they would displace them and spread them throughout their empire. Part of that was to take some of the best and the brightest and to take that group of educated people, to remove them and to say, we're going to employ you in other parts of our empire. And part of it was really to do away with and rid themselves of any kind of culture and traditions and ethnic traditions of the local population so that they would become, within a few generations, basically full-blooded cultural Assyrians. And so there were a number of people that were Jewish folks that were taken away and spread throughout the Assyrian Empire. But they couldn't take them all, and so there was a group that remained. And of those that remained, the Assyrians took other conquered people and populated that area of ancient Israel with different people too. So by the time that this happened, that Israel was conquered, the Assyrians put there not only local Jews, but they also placed Babylonians and they placed Medians and other people that they had conquered. And so there was this melting pot of cultures and people and languages and religious beliefs. Well, this happened throughout the time that the Assyrians were in control until one day the empire fell and the people were freed, and the Jews who had been displaced were allowed to return back home. But as you would suspect, after a couple of generations' time, the cultures were a little bit different. And these two groups of people, which only a few generations beforehand had all of their common Jewish heritage in common, now they were kind of seeing things a little bit differently. And the ones that left said, no, we are the ones who kept to the true traditions. And the ones who remained said, no, we are the ones who have never left the promised land, and we have been keeping up the traditions all this time, and we are doing it the right way. And the ones who had left said, yeah, but we're going to relocate, and the focus of our attention is going to be our capital of Jerusalem. And the ones who were in the north said, no, we're going to continue to be where we have been all along here, and we're going to make our capital city Samaria. And so all of these tensions began to take place. And the people in the north became known as the Samaritans, and the people in the south became known as the Jews. 800 years pass, and by the time of Jesus, this had been now grown into full-blooded hatred of these two groups of people. They shared so much common history. They shared common DNA. They shared a common God that they worshiped together, but there was enough difference that the differences instead of the commonalities were emphasized, and it caused hardship, hurt, anger, and even violence among the two groups. Jesus has his home base way far up around the Sea of Tiberias or the Sea of Galilee in that region, but he goes back and forth to Jerusalem a lot. And the short way to go was through Samaria. So in John 4, we hear this story, and thanks, Stephen, for reading that long lesson today. But we hear about Jesus and his disciples, and they are making the trek back up to Galilee from Jerusalem, and they take the shortcut through Samaria. Now, many people would have taken the longer route and followed the Jordan River pathway all the way north, but that was added extra time to the journey. So if you were brave enough to go through enemy territory, you could do that. And so Jesus and his disciples took the shortcut that day. And they get to Sychar, or Shechem, and they know that Jacob's well is nearby because this is deeply ingrained in their teaching of Scripture. And they arrive at this place, and the disciples head into town, and Jesus hangs out at the well for a little bit, and that's where he encounters this woman. So when we have this story, or we have the parable of the Good Samaritan, and it's like, how do these groups really hate each other so much? How do we understand what it's like to fully understand the Good Samaritan story? That's a little bit of the background. When Jesus meets this woman at the well, and she says, how is it that you, a Jew, ask of me a drink of water? Now you understand the context. So Jesus is at the well. He has no cup, he has no bucket, but a woman comes and she has both. She's lowering her bucket down to the well, and Jesus asks for her drink because I'm sure it is a hot day, and as you saw from the landscape, it's just blazing sun out there. And she says, how is it that you ask this of me? First of all, our people are enemies. Going back now generations, almost a millennium of animosity between your people and my people. We don't share things in common. And secondly, I'm a woman out here by myself. You're a man out here by yourself. We don't talk to each other. That is not in keeping with the social conventions of the time. So this is sort of an unusual, if not taboo, conversation to be having at all. And Jesus says, listen, if you knew who you were talking to, and you knew what I had to offer, you would take up this opportunity to receive living water, and you would never thirst again. I was able, with our group that day, to be there at that well, and I chose not to drink. Now, I regret that decision. In part because nobody got sick on the trip, and had I known that, I probably would have said, sure, pour me a cup. I'll let you guys be the guinea pigs. What a great pastor. But having said that, I think that I've thought about that as I've been reading this story. Is that an interesting sort of analogy or a metaphor? If led to the well, to Jesus' well, will we actually take the opportunity to drink deeply of what he has to offer? Or are we content to simply be led up to the well? Because that's as far as we're comfortable getting. See, what Jesus' story about the woman teaches us is that before she can say yes, which she ultimately does in this story, she has to grapple with a few things. One, implicit in this story is, hey, if you want to have what I have to offer, then some of the disagreements, the anger, the resentment, the hatred, sometimes that is your own against your enemy, or perhaps something that you have inherited that has been passed down through some kind of sickness, you need to set that aside. Because if you are going to drink the kind of waters that I am offering, you cannot bring the baggage of that long-standing hatred and animosity. If you want to drink what I have to offer, then you have to be willing to share what you have and give something of yourself in this. Jesus didn't offer to her until he first asked for something from her. Now, I don't think that that's always the way that it goes. I don't think God asks something from us first. But in this case, Jesus is wanting to extend something to her, but he would like her to be able to set aside the artificial boundaries of the hatred between the Jews and the Samaritans and said, listen, you are eligible for this, but you're going to need to lay that aside. We're going to need to be reconciled. We're going to need to share something with each other for this relationship to progress. And furthermore, you have to be comfortable with the idea that this living water that I am offering has the potential to change your life and change it significantly. There are times in our lives, I think, like I was saying, where we are led to the well. And we find that maybe that feels like enough. We get led there and we feel like, okay, well, I have this encounter with Jesus. But is there something within us that is called to do more? And I think at that point we have to come to grasps with the idea of what exactly is happening in this story. Are we prepared to set aside things that are preventing us from being in full relationship and communion with Jesus, which is coincidentally the things that keep us from being in full relationship and communion with our neighbors? Are we willing to share? Are we willing to offer something of ourselves? And are we willing to drink deeply of what Jesus offers? And I think that if we're truly being honest with ourselves, that is a much harder question to be honest about than we care to admit. We'd like to keep a lot of things, our faith, our relationship with Jesus, our commitment level at arm's reach, because we like the idea of getting up to the well, but not choosing to drink of it. Or maybe we'll take the approach, I'll see what my friends and neighbors do and see how it works out for them before I participate in it fully. The thing that happens as the turning point for this woman is that Jesus tells her something about herself. When he says, why don't you go and tell your husband, which is sort of like a trick response of Jesus. She says, I have no husband. And he says, yes, I know. Because the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, and the sixth one didn't take. And the one that you are with now is not your husband. Now, this may sound kind of judgy on Jesus' part, but 6 husbands in our time is unusual. 6 husbands in Jesus' time was really unusual. But I think that the reason that Jesus says this is not because he wants to offer a prophetic magic trick. or not because he wants to make her feel bad, but because in saying this, he exposes what I believe and what I think implied is her deepest hurt in her life. She carries around the hardship and the baggage of this knowledge, knowing that she has had 6 failed marriages now, or 5 failed marriages. She's with the 6th man now. And that everybody knows her in her small community is the woman who has been married 5 different times. And we don't know the backstory. We don't know if she's widowed 5 times. We don't know if there's been ugly ways that she has been dismissed legally and in divorce. We don't know the circumstances, but it's hard to imagine that this doesn't carry some pain for her. And Jesus just comes out and names it for her. But note what happens next. The hardest thing that she has experienced, the thing that she carries that is of greatest embarrassment or harm to her in her life, is the thing that Jesus names. And in spite of that, he says that does not preclude you from being eligible from drinking deeply of the living water that I offer. Can you imagine how liberating it would be to be in her position? Can you imagine how liberating it is in your own life to know that the things that you are most ashamed of, the secrets that are most deep within you, the things that you would do over 1,000 times differently if you could, if those things were named by Jesus and he says, I know all of that, and I want this relationship anyway. Can you feel the weight lifted off of your soul when that happens? So the turning point in this story is not when Jesus embarrasses her further, but when he names the thing that she might never feel comfortable telling him. And he says, I know it already, and it doesn't matter. I am still offering you this gift. The choice then for her is the same as it is for us. We're led to the well. The living water is before us. It's the option to go deeper into our faith, to go fully into this relationship. And sometimes the only thing that needs to be aside is reconciling with our enemies, moving past the things that caused hardship and pain in the past, being able to give of ourselves and to share what we have, and then to say, yes, Lord Jesus, you see me fully for who I am, all secrets revealed to you, and now I am willing to drink deeply of the water that you offer. And I know, because a number of you have said something to me or to a group that I was in recently, that you have said something similar where you are at a place where you have felt this tension, this pulling recently. You have felt like you are at the edge of the well and you want to drink more deeply. You feel called into a greater kind of mission or a ministry opportunity or something that God is tugging on your heart in some way, and this is an opportunity for you to drink deeply of the water. And it's time to examine what is the thing that is holding you back. And maybe some of you are saying that that's maybe not where you are, but maybe it's the initial invitation. Maybe you just feel like you have just been finally led to the well and you are having this conversation with Jesus, but there is this pull. There is something going on, this stirring, an invitation to go deeper. You know, each of these sermons in this 1-month series were the 4 days of Bible lessons for Vacation Bible School. So they were all ocean or water-themed stories. But the thing that struck me is that so far they've all had something in common, which is it's been about an individual who is pulled up to a point and then they have to trust to be released fully into the grasp of Jesus and what he offers. In the first story, we talked about Paul's shipwreck, and Paul was someone who was absolutely 100% against what Jesus was doing and was oppressing Jesus' followers until he had his conversion experience. Then he would stop at nothing to fulfill the desire to drink deeply of the living water. Last week we talked about Jonah. Jonah headed as far away, literally to the end of the earth, to go as far away from the thing that God called him to do, only to be called back and to participate fully in the story, albeit kicking and screaming. And today we have a woman who got to this point where she was at the crossroads of being able to say whether she was going to fully participate or whether just the interaction at the well that day was going to be enough. In the story of the shipwreck, you may remember, Paul prays with the men on the ship and says, God has come to me in a dream and said, we will all be spared, but we have to trust. The ship will not survive, but we will. Hang with me. And the men believe so strongly in what Paul is proclaiming that they cut the tie to the lifeboat and it goes sailing off out of sight. They're getting shallower and shallower. They're dragging their anchors because they don't want to crash up on the reef. And Paul says, you got to cut the rope on the anchors too. And they cut the anchors. There is the point of no turning back. And it's a scary spot because it feels like there's great risk involved. It's everything that you've known versus the uncertainty of what lies ahead. And yet they cut the ropes. And the same thing happens in the story today. And this is the one part that I asked Stephen to leave out of this because I wanted to read this for you now. After Jesus had been speaking to her, he said to her, I am he, the one who is speaking to you. And here's where it picks up in verse 27. Just then his disciples came, and they were astonished that he was speaking with the woman. But no one said, what do you want? Or why are you speaking with her? Here's the tiny detail, and I think it's super significant. Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. She left her water jar. It never says explicitly in the story that she said, yes, Jesus, I believe in what you're saying and I want what you are offering. Here I am, send me. But it's implied because she leaves her water jar. When he says to her, you will not need to come back here and fill this cup every single day if you will drink from the water of life, if you will take what I am offering you. And it's at this point, this turning point in the story, that she leaves the jar behind and she goes into the city because she doesn't need it anymore. Symbolically, she leaves it behind saying, I believe, I trust, I will follow. I want to drink the living water that you offer. It's her cutting the rope on the lifeboat. It's her releasing the anchors. It's her moving forward in her path of discipleship and growth for what it is that God has in store for her. This week it has been a blessing to watch these children take those tiny steps. Some of them are able to drink more deeply than others at this point. Look, they're still developing and learning about all of this, and the truth of the matter is that all of us are in a similar position. But it's on us to be awake and to be paying attention and to be watching and listening and waiting for those moments of invitation where Jesus invites us to drink more deeply. And my prayer for all of us this morning is that when those moments come, we'll be aware enough to notice, to drink deeply, to choose to accept what Christ offers, to cut our anchors, and to leave the cup behind. Because the way that Jesus promises for us going forward isn't without risk, but it is the way that leads to life. Let us pray.